Her head cracked every time I slammed it into the ground, and I liked that sound. I wanted to hear it over and over again. Even the tiles seemed to begin to crack, but nothing prevented my joy. Hello everyone. I've been locked up in this prison for a long time, but I still haven't forgotten the faces of my 3 little ones. So blonde, so good, and so handsome. I miss them, but I still believe that everything has been worth it. My conscience is clear, and I know that one day they will understand. 3 years ago, I lived quietly in Mexico with my husband and my 3 children, 4-year-old twins and a 7-year-old boy. My life wasn't full of strong or dangerous sensations. It can be said that I had a very normal life. My husband worked in construction, and I was a housewife. With 3 children so young, I was forced to leave my job to take care of their care and housework. But unfortunately, my husband's company closed, and he lost his job. Both he and I were looking for a job for one of the 2. Taking care of such young children, in addition to being very busy, was also expensive. The months went by, and the money in our checking account didn't stop going down. We hardly had enough to pay the rent. Before seeing us in the worst of situations, my husband decided to tell his parents about the situation we were in. They offered to let us live in their house until we found a job, and also they recommended us to some contacts who had businesses in their city. They lived 5 hours by car from where we were, so we would have to completely change our lives. I was not very sure about this decision, but we had no other solution. The most important thing was the stability and well-being of the little ones. The good thing is that there they could make many friends and go to schools with many more activities. During the following weeks, we take care of organizing the entire move, make boxes, manage papers, and leave everything ready. I knew that in our next destination we would have many more job opportunities, but I couldn't help but feel a tightness in my chest with the idea of living with my husband's parents. I didn't consider them bad people, but there were several details about my mother-in-law that I didn't like too much. Several times I came to notice as if she was envious of me or jealous for having taken her firstborn from her house. What made me believe this was the penetrating look from top to bottom every time she saw me. I felt as if she was analyzing every part of my body. But afterwards I coldly thought about it and realized how absurd all those thoughts were. We may not have been the best of friends, but we would have to learn to have a healthy and respectful coexistence as possible. I was sure that she would give anything for her son and grandchildren, and that was the only thought that should be in my head. When we arrived, we were greeted with a big smile. They had prepared a room for the 5 of us. It was a fairly large room with 2 double beds. Sleeping 5 in a room wasn't the most comfortable, but at least we had a roof over our heads, and I could keep an eye on the kids. Also, as soon as we found a job, we were supposed to move to another floor, so the situation would be temporary. The days passed, and everything seemed quite normal. My husband had several interviews with his mother's contacts. However, I hadn't gotten any. My husband had more work experience than me, so I understood that it would be much easier for companies to take a greater interest in his resume. As for the relationship with my in-laws, the man was all love. He liked to enjoy a time with his grandchildren, and he didn't have many conversations with me, but he treated me in a kind and cordial way. In relation to my mother-in-law, I wasn't surprised that her attitude towards me was cold or distant, since I had assumed it before arriving. So I simply tried to avoid having moments alone, or very close with her, to avoid uncomfortable looks or sharp answers. My husband was quickly hired by a company, and we began to breathe a sigh of relief. It was still early to move. He still had to spend the first month to collect his first salary, but we were already closer to our independence. My children started school there, and little by little they made new friends. That made it easier for me to be able to look for a part-time job. In this way, we would save more. I was surprised that no company had called me yet. I was a person with training and experience, and although I had been out of work for a few years due to the birth of my children, it seemed strange to me that no one had been interested in interviewing me. So I decided to hand out a few more personally, even though my mother-in-law had already handed out several. I was about to leave the house when she saw me with the papers in my hand. She started yelling at me, telling me I didn't believe her, that she had already handed out my resume all over town, and I wasn't being thanked. I didn't know what to answer. The truth is that the idea that she hadn't handed them out was on my mind, but I tried to calm her down by telling her that I wouldn't hand over the papers, and that I trusted her. From that moment, my hell began. She spent the whole day ordering me as if I were her servant. From the time I got up until I went to bed, I was doing all the housework, over and over again, even when they were already done. I cleaned the windows of the whole house every day. She even purposely stained the windows to see me clean them again. And if at any time I told her that I needed to rest a little, she would yell at me, telling me that I was lazy and that they were supporting me, that I should compensate them for the expense that they assumed. Not even in the worst trades was I so tired, both physically and mentally. That lady was the devil herself. She treated me like I was worthless, putting me down and yelling at me for every single thing that was wrong. I put up with it as long as I could, until one day I decided to confess everything to my husband. He wanted to excuse his mother by arguing that she was alone and wanted to spend more time with me. I couldn't understand how he could be so manipulated by her. In the end, this only ended in arguments and fights with my husband. And I'm sure she enjoyed it. She liked to see me have a hard time, and she even prayed that we would part. The days passed and it was getting harder and harder to endure in that house. But finally, my husband received his first payment. I was talking to him alone about the idea of starting to look for a rental in the city, when his mother interrupted us by saying that he had to give her part of that salary. She had supported 5 more people that month, so she needed more money. My husband didn't hesitate for a moment and agreed with his mother, giving her half of what he had received. And with the money that we had left over, again, we didn't have enough to go to another floor. We would have to wait another month to collect more. The situation continued to worsen. I even started to scold my children for everything, muttering under my breath that it was the education their mother had taught them. I just wanted to get out of that house. The children and I took refuge in the room as if we were prisoners in a jail. They had stopped playing with their grandfather. They always wanted to stay in the room so as not to be with my mother-in-law. The days passed, and the insults and shouts increased. Every time I found myself more suffocated, I lived on the verge of madness. I managed to find her checking my phone. I demanded that she give it to me immediately, and she answered me with insults. When my husband arrived, we ended up having an argument because his mother had told him that I was secretly talking to me with someone else. I felt extremely humiliated, having to explain who I was talking to. But I had nothing to hide. I threw my phone at him and told him to check whose number it was. He was my brother, the only one with whom I had been able to vent the nightmare I was living. I was burning with rage. My mother-in-law had managed to create a tense and mistrustful situation, endangering the relationship with my husband. After a very heated discussion, I told him that he had to decide, either his parents or his children and me, because I was going to take them with me from that house. My husband seemed to come to his senses and talk to his parents. My father-in-law didn't say anything, but instead the lady screamed as if her life depended on it. She accused me of being a liar and threatened her son that he would be fired from his job if we left. I couldn't understand anything. What did that woman want? It was clear that she hated us, but she wanted us there. She wanted to feel the feeling of power in us. If my husband was fired, we would have nowhere to go, so we had no choice but to bow our heads and hold on until we got the money. One day, after leaving the children at school, full of frustration and despair, I approached several companies with my resume. I no longer had any doubts that my mother-in-law had not delivered any, to have me as her servant all day. I needed the job. We needed to get out of there. When I got back to the house, the lady was waiting for me with folded arms at the entrance. She demanded that I tell her the reason for my absence. I decided to ignore her and headed to my room. At that moment, she grabbed my arm, trying to remove my bag to check it. I tried to stop her by pulling it hard. Without time to react, she slapped me in the face. I stared at her with wide eyes, and without thinking twice, I pushed her hard, knocking to the ground. Suddenly, I felt out of my mind. I felt extreme heat in my body. It was as if another person had taken over my being. I had run out of sanity and reason. All I wanted was to kill her and smash her skull on the floor. As I wanted it more, I was executing it with more force and anxiety. I couldn't understand myself what was happening to my mind, but I couldn't help but feel pleasure from every blow I dealt her. Her head cracked every time I slammed it into the ground, and I liked that sound. I wanted to hear it over and over again. Even the tiles seemed to begin to crack, but nothing prevented my joy. It was as if I became the protagonist of the creepypastas that my children watched. When I felt satisfied, I dismembered that old and wrinkled body bathed in blood. I cut off her head, hands, feet, and I only kept her limbs. I buried the torso and the head in a nearby piece of land. Afterwards, I cleaned the house with bleach so as not to leave any traces of blood. With the body parts that I hadn't buried, I prepared a good dinner. There was much to celebrate. My father-in-law was away with his brother, and the kids and my husband weren't home, so I was able to indulge in the kitchen. While I was cooking, I was recreating in my head the conversations of everything I had to say, so that no one would suspect anything of the crime. At noon, I went to pick up the children from school and took them home. For them, and for me, I prepared their favorite food, pasta with tomato. But for my husband, I had prepared a much better meal. Soon he arrived and we sat down to eat. "Do you know where my mother is?" my husband asked, as he ate his mother's leg dipped in tomato sauce. My face lit up as I watched him chew and swallow the flesh of that demon. Every time it writhed in his mouth, and the blood from her leg mixed with the tomato sauce. It was hard for me to hide my smile, and the joy that seeing that scene gave me. I wiped my mouth and told him that his mother had gone on a spiritual retreat with the people of the parish church. He seemed convinced, and my plan was going perfectly. The next day, my husband went to work, and I took the children to school like every morning. When I got home, I couldn't believe it. I was alone at last. My mother-in-law would never bother me again. I put on all her jewelry, necklaces, rings, bracelets, and sang throughout the house with loud music. I was full. Something had changed inside me, and the strangest thing is that I didn't feel a drop of regret or guilt. After my karaoke session, I decided to prepare the food. That day, my husband would eat his mom inside some delicious dumplings. First, I boiled the meat so that it would crumble better from the bone, and once it was softer, I divided it into pieces with my hand. I would be lying if I said that it never crossed my mind to try a piece of that juicy meat, but I didn't want to have any of that woman's poison in my body. At my children, of course, I wasn't going to give their grandmother as a meal. That day, I prepared some vegetables with rice for them. When noon came again, I could contemplate the sight of my husband devouring his mother. The dumplings were a total success. He kept telling me how good they were, and that I should repeat them more times. However, as the days passed, my happiness turned into anguish. My husband kept asking me about his mother. He told me it was very strange that she was away for so many days, and when my father-in-law arrived, my excuse was no longer valid. His wife hadn't told him anything about that trip, and it wasn't common for her to spend so many days without giving any explanations. That's where the suspicions began. They inquired in the parish church and discovered that there was no such spiritual retreat. Police soon found the remains of the lady in the adjoining field. It is clear that the emotion of the moment did not allow me to plan it too well. I must have cooked absolutely the whole body, so as not to arouse suspicion. In the remains of the corpse, they found my fingerprints. I had nowhere to go, and I pleaded guilty. In my statement, I confirmed that I would gladly do it again, because that lady wanted to destroy my life. I think that's why they gave me more years in prison. They said something about me being a highly dangerous criminal. My husband ended up in a psychiatric hospital when he found out that he had eaten his mommy at lunch. I think he must feel guilty for how much he enjoyed the taste of that meat. The worst thing about all this is they took my little ones away from me. They were left in the hands of an institution for minors in adoption, and as far as I know, a good family is taking care of them. And I'm still here, locked up, paying for something that could have been avoided if we hadn't moved to that place. I'm not the same. I'm not afraid of anything or anyone. I can only say that a criminal is not always born. Sometimes people do.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.